Hi, I'm Anthony from Cindy Backyard Veggies. Been away from my garden for the last 2 weeks, been overseas with the family. Flew in this morning and I'm just out in the patch now, just trying to get a quick catch up on where my garden's at and do those quick maintenance jobs now to put the garden back on track. Most of the garden generally stayed, did pretty well and was producing, but you'd be amazed how much growth you get in your garden in that 2-week period. And the first thing I'm going to do at the moment is actually do a bit of work on my tomatoes. And if you remember 2 weeks ago, my tomato patch was struggling a bit and I treated these tomatoes with a bit of sulfate of ammonia and Epsom salt and watered in before I left. And coming back to them, a lot of them look like they've done really well. I've got a couple here which are looking really well developed, as you can see there, but I still have a few which are struggling, like these ones at the front, which still have the signs of the damage that we had before I left. What I'm going to do is just do a bit of work on these. Actually going to start needing some staking. There's a few different things I need to do with these tomatoes, but before I do that, I'm going to come and clean up these weeds and just with my hoe, just to knock them all out, and so we can get a better look at what these tomatoes are doing at the moment. Finished cleaning out those weeds and you can see the tomatoes a lot better now. Just as a recap, these tomatoes are a Roma variety of tomatoes planted 3 weeks ago. Started these in late December. Planted 14 plants in the space at about 40 centimeters apart in rows 60 centimeters apart. Now, when I originally planted these tomatoes, really struggled with the heat earlier on and really struggled with the rain that came afterwards. And before I left, I added some Epsom salt and sulfate of ammonia to really see if I can outgrow the disease and the pest infestations that they had. Coming back to these tomatoes, most of them look okay. Like this here is looking healthy. This damage here is just legacy damage from the issues they had when they first were planted out. But the new growth is looking really good, even to a point where I'm starting to get flowers. Now that tomato looks great, but looking at some of the other tomatoes, there are a few tomatoes here that are still stunted, and it appears to whatever issues I had before I left are still there. If I bring you in closer, you can just see this is one of the tomatoes that's still stunted, still got the legacy damage below, but this curling of the leaves for me is a sign that this has some sort of sap-sucking insect damage that I still have to treat. And it actually looks worse on this one. You can just see the lower leaves are still quite curled, and although the new growth looks okay, still I feel that these are still struggling with sap-sucking insects, whether it's thrips or it's aphids, so, or anything like that. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to need to be treating that. And what I'll do is actually give them a quick spray of pyrethrum, and using pyrethrum should be able to clean that up, and I may not see any more of that damage. For the ones that are struggling like this, what I'm going to be doing is first just removing a lot of these damaged leaves at the bottom, just to clear them up, and just going to be adding just a little bit more Epsom salt. Now, to water the Epsom salt in, I'm going to make a mix of liquid fertilizer, and I want something with high nitrogen, so I'm going to be using Power Feed. I want that high boost of nitrogen to encourage it to start putting on a lot more growth and a lot more leaves. It needs to outgrow this stunted growth. And because I'm going to be hilling these tomatoes as part of my staking, I'm just going to add a little bit of potash as well for the base. Just finished fertilizing those tomatoes, and I've just installed the stakes for them and used the leaves at this stage to support the tomato, tying the leaf to the stake. And if I bring you in closer, you can just see that's just what I've done. Just tied the tomato leaf to the stake, and that should give it plenty of support while if the wind picks up as it continues to put on a bit of size. what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to hill the soil, and I do this regularly on all my tomatoes. I'm just going to move all the soil from the left and the right, just bring it up to the stem of the tomato. And the idea there is that it will encourage more roots to grow along the stem. It's just a trick I do with every one of my tomato plantings, and it does, and the results speak for themselves. It does grow. Moving over to the next job, I'm gonna go and work on my corn now. This batch of corn 2 weeks ago was almost ready to harvest. It was literally a couple of days away. During the time I've been away, Mum and Dad have been harvesting them, and I've harvested close to 40 ears over 2 seedlings now. Coming back here now, there are still a few ears left on the plant. I'm just going to pull it back. I was worried that they were going to get hard and like old, but looking at that, that's perfect. I'm going to harvest the last of the ears. These ears should all be harvested by now, and I'm actually anxious that they've probably gone over the best. They've seen their best, and they're going to start to get a bit chewy and lose their sweetness, so I really want to harvest them today. Right, well, while I'm here, I just wanted to show you the commercial grade seeds generally have a habit of putting out bits of corn on the tassels as well, and these are fine. These get fed to the chooks. It's just a nice cheap way to get an extra meal for the chickens, so I'll be grabbing those and feeding them to the chooks as well. Just had a quick walk through the patch, and doesn't seem to be much left over. Most of it got harvested by my parents. I was able to harvest a few secondary ears, not overly huge, but I'll just clean these up, and then if there's anything to eat here, I'll keep it. Otherwise it'll go to the chickens, and the chickens will pick at the rest of that. For the corn stalks, I'm actually going to be using these as part of my composting. I'm going to be pulling them out, letting them dry out a bit, and then I'll be running them through the lawnmower just to break them down. They'll go into the chicken pen, they'll get eaten, whatever they can pick at, they'll pick at, and then the rest will go onto the compost pile. So none of it gets wasted, and this is actually quite good organic material to throw back on your compost pile. Back out in the garden this afternoon. There's a big storm coming. It's been a pretty hot day today, and I'm now moving on to my green beans and my Borlotti beans. And if you remember what I had here, this was my Borlotti beans, red rooster, and before I left they were just starting to colour, but as you can see they are starting to dry out, and now these need to be picked. And I had given them about a 2-week time frame for them to get ready. They need to be pulled out, harvested, because these rains are going to not do them any favours, and I want to make sure I harvest the crop before the rain impacts them. Likewise over here, this is my green beans, Jackson, and the beans I've all produced, but now they're starting to get just a little bit on the larger side, and I need to harvest these as well. 2 reasons: one, to make sure they don't get any woodier or stringier, but secondly to encourage these plants to reflower. See how we go, but I'm going to be harvesting the Borlotti beans first, and I'll show you the final crop. It's funny what 2 weeks does to a planting. Remember previously they were just starting to colour, and now I'm picking off dried beans. Now the risky run here now is, especially with the rain, is that these seeds will start moulding, and you can just see just a little mould just there. Now hopefully when I shell this it should be relatively clean, but yeah, just the heat and the sun really dries them out, so really anxious to get through the harvest. Just breaking through the harvest of Borlotti beans, and this is what I was referring to with a little bit of excess water on dried seedlings. What you end up having is the beans start sprouting. You can just see that they start sprouting within the pod, and it sort of destroys your crop. So the idea is try to harvest them just a bit earlier than later, because as soon as you get a bit of water on them, they'll germinate and they'll become useless. Back out in the garden this afternoon. It started raining on me as I was halfway through picking those Borlotti beans, but I've just finished doing it now. I just wanted to show you what the final harvest looked like, and that's the full tub. Now there were two sections. One was a younger section, and they gave me really nice coloured pods. This is the kind of colour exactly I look for personally. I like to pick them at this stage, and if you open them up, these are creamy white and disease free, no mold, no disease on them. So these are perfect. This is the kind of style I like to harvest, because these would be stored in the freezer. I'm going to be shelling these beans tonight, and I'll show you what the amount I get, but also the damage that you get on some of these beans. I went to harvest my Jackson green beans, and as I was harvesting them, I've realized that they've actually gone too far, and I tried a few of them, and they're not crunchy. They're actually quite soft and slimy. It's just they've gone way too far from their prime. So unfortunately, I'm going to be ripping out a lot of these beans. Jackson doesn't seem to do as well if you let it grow too long on the plant. It seems to really fall off in quality once it goes over that ideal harvest time. But on the flip side, the jade bush beans, which I planted about a week or so after, did quite well. They're also gone past their prime, but I'd come through here this afternoon and actually harvested a lot of the beans off these, and cleaned them all off, and there's still a few bits and pieces here, but they tend to keep their crispiness a lot more as they grow. So you know, it's got quite good crunch to it. So jade is really good it's a lot more forgiving if you don't pick it straight away. That's the jade bush beans, and again, even the larger ones where they go too far, a bit too far, and they're stuck in, they're still very quite crispy, and so they still maintain their integrity. So if you are growing beans, again, jade beans, very forgiving, produce a great bean and a great harvest. So that's my go-to, and I'm actually going to try to plant one more. We're in that, you know, just after Australia Day, you know, got a few more weeks of, you know, good weather. I'm going to plant at least 2 or 3 more rows of jade bush beans just to cover me up for the end of the season. But I'll take these, give them a wash, and I'll shell those Borlotti beans, and I'll show you what the final harvest is on those ones. And just as an update on my Borlotti beans, I shelled them last night. Got myself 1.7 kilos of shelled peas. Now I'm going to be splitting them up into 500 gram portions, and I'll put them in the freezer, and I'll store them in the freezer until I'm ready to use them. I'm in the garden today, and I'm still trying to find time in the breaks in the weather to be able to continue working in my garden. Next on the list of things I need to look at now that I'm back is my corn planting. And if you remember, before I left, planted out 4 rows of corn seedlings over here, and then I direct seeded 2 rows. Now these actually germinated quite well and are looking really strong, and they need a bit of work, just a little bit of weeding, and I'm going to fill out the gaps where the seeds didn't germinate. I've got 2 positions, or 1 position here and just 1 position at the front row. For the other planting, the ones that I planted seedlings, again, a weed, a lot more fertilizer. These need fertilizer, and they do need to be healed, but at this stage I'm just going to add some fertilizer to them. I'm going to run my wire weeder across this bed just to clear out all these weeds. Ideally I would have hit them a bit earlier when they were smaller, but they've just sort of outgrown me at the moment. But wire weeder would do quick work of these. Once I do that, I'll add their first round of fertilizer. So I just finished weeding those plants, and it's going to have a quick rough weeding just to get the bulk of those weeds out of the way. They do need fertilizer, and ideally I would give them sulfate of ammonia, but I'm going to save that for about 2 weeks time when I've healed the plants. Meanwhile, I'm going to add my first round of initial fertilizer, and it's chicken manure pellets. Just going to pour at the base of each of the plants and put a nice little pour there, just to make sure that they get every plant gets half a handful. And then I'll just leave that, and as the irrigation runs, it will dilute those pellets and feed those plants slowly. Over at my direct seeded corn, I need to also add a bit of fertilizer, but before that I'm going to transplant some of these seedlings to fill in the gaps. Ideally you work to one seedling per location, so I'm going to be removing the weakest of the two, but at the same time I'm also going to be transplanting some to the new locations. And what I'm going to do is just going to lift, for example, I'll lift these two and I'll put one in that location, one back in here, and I'll probably end up lifting a second one, say these two, and again plant one of those in that location. That's all done now, and once they're watered, they should settle in. I'll just make sure they keep shaded when it gets a bit hot, so that it can just firm up their roots. I'm going to come through later on, maybe next week, just to thin out the weaker one of these seedlings. I might let them grow just a little bit longer, but definitely thin them out. You don't want to leave 2 seedlings per location. They just won't produce, they'll outcompete each other. And before I upload this video, just want to give you an update on my brassica seedlings. And before I left for my break, I started off some cauliflower, some broccoli, and some pak choi and lettuce seedlings. And thank you to my brother-in-law who looked after them for me while I was away. These are now ready to go, ready to be planted out, and they look amazing. Beautiful seedlings, so really happy with how they are. And they'll be going out in the beds this weekend, so in a few days time I'm looking at planting all of them. I've got a lot of space now that I've cleared out a lot of those old veggies, and hopefully it'll be a great start to autumn season. And I will put up a video later on next week of how I planted them out and where I planted them out in my patch. Thank you very much everyone for joining me in this video. I really appreciate all the support, and I hope to see you in the next one.